Last week, we walked through the yield stack for the on-chain economy and where the biggest names on Wall Street are placing their bets across that stack. BlackRock at the reserve layer, Apollo at the protocol layer, and Circle at the chain layer. Today, we're going to go one level deeper because every one of those bets is based on a critical choice, whether to go permissioned or permissionless. On one side, you have gated rails, regulated wrappers, and recourse. On the other side, you have open code, public ledgers, no gatekeeper, and no recall. Today, we're going to debate which side wins. This is Samantha Lewis, and this is Money Moves. We're going to do something a little different this week. I slightly prepped you guys, but it's going to be great. It's going to be fun. We're going to go deep into a big debate in the digital asset space. And this is whether to go permissioned or permissionless. So Dave, since you're the crypto OG bro, you're going to take the permissionless side. And Ian, since you're the finance bro, you're going to take the permissioned side. But before we get there, Dave, kick us off as usual. Explain to everyone.
Yes.
Give us some context, like what does permission versus permissionless actually mean in context of the digital asset space?
Yes, it's good to be the resident crypto historian and to walk you down the hollowed halls of this industry.
We're going to start calling you Professor Crypto Dave.
Yeah, that would be cool. I don't know if my friends would think that's cool, but nevertheless. So look, this debate over permission and permissionless is really at the core of the genesis for everything we're talking about here today. So let's go through a little history lesson. So as we know, this entire movement really kicked itself off with the introduction of Bitcoin and early cryptocurrencies like Ethereum. Their stated mission, core to that stated mission, was the permissionless nature of these networks and of the applications built on them. And by permissionless, we mean there's no single authority or industry body or entity or even group of entities that can dictate who has access to the network, who can use the network, who can build on the network, who can transact on the network. At their core, these networks like Bitcoin or Ethereum were built to present to the world a completely different model, where you had the traditional financial system where it was gated and closed at every step, right? Where you needed a bank or some type of institution or some type of regulatory body to admit you to that network and to give you the right to transact and to build and to interact with that network. And these networks wanted to forge a different way. They said this gated system, these closed walled gardens are bad. They leave out billions of people, and we want to build a system where there's no control or gatekeepers or toll booths. And that system thrived for a while. And what we had, as we talked about in the last episode, was then these institutions look at the industry and say, there's a lot of tremendous innovation going on in these cryptocurrencies. We can use the technology behind these things to make traditional financial markets and traditional financial services much more efficient, much faster, much smarter, across a number of different use cases, right? What we think of as tokenization. And they actually went to the complete other end of the spectrum on the permissionless. So all these early sort of initiatives around tokenization and payments and how to use blockchain and mainstream financial markets started off as completely walled gardens, either consortiums of industry participants or large institutions where everyone that was participating in the network had a known identity and usually signed some type of terms of service or terms of agreement or adherence agreement to follow the rules dictated by these participants. None of these initiatives really took off at all. And a lot of that was due to the fact that because these were walled gardens, they had none of the network effects that the permissionless settlement layers did, where anyone with an internet connection could connect and support and build applications and innovate on that network. And so fast forward today, the state that we find ourselves in, and this is what we'll debate, whether this is an either or a both question, is you have if we kind of go back to the three different layers that we spoke about last week, we have the settlement layer, which is the blockchain network, the issuance layer, and then the application layer. By and large, the settlement layer is permissionless. So you have all of these different networks, whether you're a DeFi application that's entirely permissionless or your BlackRock. These assets and these applications are being issued and built on permissionless infrastructure because of the network effects that they drive. The issuance layer is a mixed bag. So stablecoins, the most popular, by and large, 99% of stablecoins in circulation are permissionless, meaning anyone with an internet connection can hold them. Now, the issuers will make you go through KYC to mint and redeem, to create stablecoins and redeem stablecoins directly with the issuer. So if you open an account with Circle or you open an account with Tether, they will KYC you, you'll adhere to their terms of service. But the rest of the world can buy USDC without any KYC, can send USDC to anyone without any KYC. Anyone with an internet connection can build on USDC, can transfer USDC. And then on the application layer, as well as the tokenization of other financial assets, that is also a mixed bag, right? So you have some applications and some tokens that get issued that require you to be permission. You need to go through KYC, you need to sign some agreement, they need to know who you are for you to hold them, to interact with those applications and hold and transfer those tokens. And then you have the entire DeFi world, where you have decentralized exchanges and you have dApps, as they call them, decentralized apps, where you can interact with tokens and assets and financial applications without any sort of KYC. And so there's a debate that rages consistently because it goes back to the sort of heart of what this technology represents of, should everything be permission? Should everything be permissionless? Should there be a hybrid approach? And Ian and I are going to debate that for the remainder of this episode.
Ian, anything to add there?
I would say that I think that at the issuer level, when we talk about stablecoins, while people can buy them in DeFi, the fact that the subscription and redemption or the create redeem function needs to be KYC'd tells you a lot between the difference between them and Bitcoin. And effectively, Bitcoin was an internet native money with its own self-promulgation. Stablecoins are not. Stablecoins are, insofar as they're dollar-backed stablecoins, are an extension of the US dollar. They're a technology extension to the US Navy, to strong education system that we have, to the Bill of Rights. They're an extension to a social compact and an economic compact in the United States. And there's a reason why the largest players there require, to get actual dollars out, the movement of those dollars, a KYC function. And if you couldn't redeem for dollars those stablecoins would not work. And I'm happy to unpack that. So I would say, I would rephrase it a little bit. At the network level, it's much like the internet. Blockchains are permissionless, just like the internet's permissionless. Anybody, anywhere can get into the internet. Nobody's asking you, at least not yet in the US, and unfortunately, I think soon in France. But so far, so good. Most of the world, the internet's permissionless. And the public blockchains follow that model. At the issuer level, where there's a redemption function through traditional monies, those you can pay your taxes with, those that governments pay their employees with, unclear how permissionless that really is. And then at the application layer, I completely agree with Dib. So I think we need to understand why it's a mixed bag at the issuer level and why Bitcoin is differentiating from some of the other issuances per se.
Yeah, it's a good point to actually bring Bitcoin into it and why there's still such Bitcoin maxis out there. And that's probably an entire episode too, but it will be interesting to weave that through. So is it too simplified, guys, if I wanted to explain it like this for the audience, which is permissionless is code is law. A lot of people say that in DeFi all the time, right? Permissionless means code is law. Permissioned means current regulatory and law is law.
Yeah, it's It's so basically the way that the permissionless world has been built up is because there's no legal personality involved in any of these applications. Like there's no individual or corporate entity that or can enter into like binding contracts. Like for a contract to be valid, there needs to be a human or a business, something with legal personality on the other end. Because you're just, as far as these applications and these networks are concerned, you're bits on the internet. You're just a wallet address. There's the only terms that can govern your interaction with those applications or network are encapsulated in computer code, right? And the smart contracts that make up these protocols and the code that underpins these blockchain networks. That is the law that and so a lot of people think that that's good because the code in these networks is transparent to everyone. So there's like a very deterministic, transparent way in which these rules can be interpreted by everyone and can be enforced completely objectively without any subjectivity. Any subjectivity that could be poisoned by any partisan motives or self-interested sort of protectionism from some type of incumbent lobby. It's the code is the law, and that's what you get. And that was the entire point of Bitcoin, was that like the reason Bitcoin was created was because Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he or she or they or what group of people that was disaffected with what happened in the GFC and the financial crisis, and said we need a financial system that exists outside of this kind of sick, corrupt banking system. And so we're going to create this thing called Bitcoin, and the rules of Bitcoin are going to live as code, and everyone's going to be free to interpret that and bind themselves to that without any human intervention.
I think we're a long way from the creation of Bitcoin, though, right? Like there's been a lot of time that passed and a lot of innovation that's come to the front. And so it's really curious. I would be so curious to hear how you guys think about how Bitcoin's going to position itself in the world now that you have stable coins, because you have an alternative that you didn't really have before. But let's just go ahead and start getting into the debate. So Dave, you already started for us. Good job. You're making the case for permissioned. As I said at the beginning of the episode, you're going to be wearing the permissionless hat. Ian, you're going to be wearing the permissioned hat. So Dave, since you already kind of kicked us off, just make the case. So if you're a Wall Street institution or you're a fintech company and you're trying to decide like how you're going to start engaging with the blockchain world, how do you make a choice?
Yeah. So before I get into this, I do want to put the caveat out there that I think both Ian and I believe in a world where both have value and both exist together. So the hybrid model. I'm going to be the devil's advocate for this episode, but my company has permissioned and permissionless products. They serve different people for different reasons at different times and at different places in the world. But I can make the permissionless argument because I've lived through it and in it for the last dozen years or so. So I put basically there's two angles to this. One is I guess somewhat pessimistic argument, which is to say that the core, not pessimistic, but the core innovation of a blockchain, and Marc Andreessen had a op-ed in the New York Times in 2014 that kind of laid this out pretty poetically, which was the core innovation of Bitcoin and blockchains by that extension is that I can declare a truth over the internet in a way that requires no intermediary to verify that truth, right? That could be a transaction, an ownership of an asset. It is a way to create digital property, digital assets, and move those between machines over the internet without any intermediaries. That is like the core and only innovation behind Bitcoin and blockchains. Like distributed systems, like real time, have existed for a long time. Like having a shared public ledger isn't like a real innovation. And that really the innovation is like the economic game theory behind these permissionless networks that allows them to run themselves and support financial systems with no permissions, no identity. It's the Byzantine general problem is what they've solved. Like that's the core innovation of like how you can build trust over the internet without any intermediary, like identifying the different parties. And if you're doing
Dave, explain what that terminology is for everyone.
Well, there's this Byzantine general problem, which is this problem in cryptography where you have essentially two generals who are trying to send messages to one another. And it exposes how difficult it is for the receiving general who doesn't have line of sight to the sending general for them to verify that the message they received is valid. Like there could be some nefarious general in between that like catches the horse rider with the message and knocks him off his horse and kills him and sort of writes down a new message and takes it to the general that says attack at dawn, and that ends up getting the army wiped out, right? So this is a cryptography problem that people have been trying to solve. And so what the computer scientists said, like Bitcoin was sort of the first cryptographic network one of the first to solve this problem and use that application to help people move internet money over the internet. So it was a way for people to come to an agreement on the state of a ledger, and do that without having to put any trust in any one party, right? And so that, like people say, is the core innovation of Bitcoin and by extension blockchains. And if you're using it in a manner that doesn't require that sort of trustlessness, where the parties are known, and if the parties are known, then you can establish some sort of trust. You can bind terms to them. You can create consequences for breaking those terms. That you're really you're not using you don't need a blockchain, right? And so it's only in these use cases where you need a permissionless ecosystem of participants, and you want them to transact. And so because you want them to transact, you need a way to establish trust in those transactions. That's the only place where a blockchain shines. The second, and I'll make this short, the second argument for permissionless is that, forget all that cryptographic innovation, it's great. Permissionless networks and permissionless applications get the greatest network effects. And the technology that we're talking about here is a technology whose value is directly correlated to its network effects. And because the barrier to entry, the barrier to innovation, the barrier to use is as low as it can be in permissionless networks. You don't have any gatekeepers, you have no KYC requirements. Anyone with an internet connection can build on them, can transact on them, can interact with them. That removes all the impediments that you could, like one of the biggest impediments to adoption, and allows many people and many businesses around the world to adopt these things, which makes them much more valuable. Like a permission network of like 10 banks is gonna go nowhere, right? Like in terms of like changing the world, like the financial world. But if
and like you've talked about, we've gone through that iteration.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I'll summarize by saying, but if you have a network that the entire world is on, and the entire world uses to move money, that will change the world, right? And the permissionless aspect is key to us getting to that adoption. And so that is why you go permissionless, is really for the network effects.
All right, Ian, you're up.
So I think I need to parse this a little bit. I think you talked about a feature of permissionlessness, which is trustlessness. And it's inherent in permissionlessness, but can be lifted out of permissionlessness and lifted into the permission space. So let me do that. You talked about how in the Byzantine general example, you avoid the risks of a double spend, effectively the concept of fraud, a common knowledge and truth around how much and what transaction took place and when. That's a feature of public blockchains. It does not have to be a feature of permissionless versus permissioned financial asset issuance and purchase and sale. In fact, I think one of the most attractive features of modern permissioned financial services on blockchains, and this is, Wall Street's good at this. The man is good at this. Institutions are good at this. They are good at adopting things on the edge and then making them part of themselves. Good institutions and good countries and good systems adopt the best features outside of themselves. Co-opt is a strong and unnecessary word, but integrate them into the way that they work. And so the trustlessness that you speak of in the permissionless space, I think, is easily imported into a feature of the permission space from public blockchains. So I'd make that point. What would be an example of that? If we were trying to create a new market and everybody wanted to know when a transaction took place, a really great way to do that, and a ledger that everybody could trust, would to run that marketplace on a permissionless blockchain, any of the major ones, whether they're EVM compatible or not. And that would be a great feature. And that doesn't make those marketplaces necessarily permissioned or not permissioned. What makes them permissioned is that the wallets that can connect to that marketplace are KYC'd. That the individuals to participate in that marketplace need to have their wallet addresses whitelisted. That is what defines the difference between permissionless and permissioned. In the example of that we talked about with stablecoins, it means that the wallet holder with the USDC, for instance, to get dollars back, that needs to be a known holder. I'm simplifying this, but just to stay with the idea. So the first thing I would say is the permissioned markets are increasingly going to co-opt and absorb, take advantage of, as Picasso said, good artists create and great artists steal. And so what will happen is the great financial institutions of the future are going to take the best ideas from the permissionless world and they're going to drop them into the permissioned world. And trustlessness is a phenomenal example of that.
But if you know who the people are, why do you do trustlessness?
Because the ledger itself is very expensive to build trust in, and the blockchains themselves have proven a better technology to show that a transaction has taken place. We covered this in a prior episode, but my basic belief is if I'm trying to create a new marketplace for a new infrastructure, and I need to have everybody agree, this is especially true in the agentic world, and I need to have everybody agree at exactly the moment to the millionth of a millisecond, okay, when a transaction took place and how much took place and by whom. Blockchains today are a better technology to do that, I would argue, from a trustlessness perspective than if I was to just stand up a centralized ledger. Who am I to say when the transactions took place as Ian? But everybody seems to trust that Avalanche, for instance, take our friends at Avalanche, everybody trusts that the Avalanche blockchain can be trusted for this purpose. So that's why you need it, because especially today we see the early stages of it, but certainly in a world of agentic commerce where the US has an extra 100 million workers because they're agents and bots, where their transactions took place and how that worked. We don't have a great ledger for that that's trusted by everybody today. That doesn't exist. And the blockchains are actually a solution to that problem. So those permissionless blockchains solve the trustlessness problem, even if those bots' wallets need to be whitelisted to engage in the commercial activity. So I would make that point. The second point that I would make is, and this is a bigger point, is when we talk about permissioned broadly, what we're talking about is an authority, an entity that whitelists these wallets. And that means that entity acts to some extent as a central point of interaction for the government and for those institutions in knowing who else is on that and in that application. So if they know that they have to go through certain processes to whitelist with me, they can trust that everybody has to go through those same processes. And so they can trust who their counterparts are. And I think it's really important to understand who you're doing business with. We have a very clear social contract that we do not engage with, work with, do business with many different kinds of people for different reasons. We might not believe it's appropriate to do business with a child. We might not believe that it's appropriate to do business with a terrorist organization. We may believe it is not appropriate to do business with an institution that has been proven to be fraudulent and is a bad actor. So when a party to a permissioned application has to go through this process, they can trust that others in that network have all abided by the same rules, and that actor who's checking that KYC, checking who those wallets are, is doing that across the board. And so this is actually a way for communities. We don't think about it this way. We think about the permissionless world as the only one who can create communities because we're cypherpunks and that's cool. But at the end of the day, when you've decided to enter into a social contract of not doing business with terrorist organizations or bad actors or children or any of these things, you've chosen to formulate a community. And so in some sense, the permissioned framework actually is a community organization tool. It's a social organization tool. And it brings in the best of trustlessness, which is going to be increasingly important, and allows for community building through a same set of rules that everybody needs to qualify for, that everybody agrees is an organizing point for that commercial community.
I think what a proponent of the permissionless world would say is, if you've established this community as you've laid out, where what you've said multiple times, that you need to be able to trust these people, and really that gatekeeping function is how you build trust, that they're an eligible participant.
Well, there's rules. I wouldn't say it's not capricious. Sorry to interrupt. It's not a capricious gatekeeping function.
No, I know.
It's a relatively transparent, straightforward, and immutable, because we have a set of rules that we all abide by. So I would argue that the gatekeeping function can sometimes be seen as capricious, and I just want to establish that it's anything but. It's quite clearly delineated. I agree. So in this scenario, yes, it's a non-capricious, good. We're assuming the process to suss out bad actors and only admit good actors works. So if it works so well, why do you need a trustless piece of technology to transact with parties? Like, if you know who they are and they act bad, because you don't actually have because the trustlessness doesn't apply to the actors in the application. It applies to the application itself. Mm-hmm. So how do I we'll take Profit, or we'll take Ian Epstein, we'll take, smaller individuals or smaller businesses. If I've got a great idea, if I've got a great application, how do I get Goldman Sachs and the U.S. government and Pension Fund in Wyoming and Sovereign Wealth Fund, how do I get them to all trust me that their transactions took place at an exact moment, which is what determines how much they're owed? Will they trust me in my centralized ledger that I need to somehow make available to them? And even then is debatable about whether or not I can change the rules of that if it's a centralized ledger. Or are they better off trusting a public permissionless blockchain to get that same trustlessness benefit? That's why you need it. You don't need the permissionless blockchain so that those actors, think about a centralized application, and then think about everybody around it that creates a network effect. You don't need the trustlessness so that all these people trust each other. You need it so that they trust the application node in the middle. So the trustlessness of a permissionless blockchain achieves that at the application level, and then all of this community can trust each other because the application layer is taking care of the KYC.
I mean, you could do what you're saying with a centralized database. Like, you could.
I think it's harder, and I think it's a lot more expensive.
There's ways to establish trust, and
the cost. Yeah, sure. I don't disagree. The cost of doing that, look, brands matter, acceptability matters. Trust is a faith-based industry, mm-hmm. and these permissionless blockchains have established themselves as having the right brand for major institutions to believe that they are accurate. Their brands are valuable, they're worth billions of dollars as implied by their market caps. And so if for me to make an equivalent quality brand of Ledger Trust, even if it's a fraction of the multi-billion dollars worth of valuation that these permissionless blockchains have, is still incredibly expensive versus the cost of simply paying the gas fees on these permissionless blockchains so that I can take advantage and ride the coattails of their brand.
And we're kind of, like, I've already answered the question. Like, we've kind of we did this in the last episode where we kind of bottomed out why you would use. So but I'm going to keep going on this, which is actually, okay, your permission use case, you've established that you need to know who's transacting, but you still need to trust the infrastructure on which
the transaction. You want to create a layer of trust around who's transacting. That's what we call the permissioned KYC piece. Yeah. But then you want a layer of trust around what is transacted, and that's the permissionless public blockchain.
And so, well, look, if we follow this line of reasoning to its logical conclusion, I think the argument is better that you shouldn't use a permissionless blockchain, because the actual rules of that permissionless blockchain are defined by an anonymous group of people that you have no control over. Like, here's an example. Multiple times in the history of Bitcoin and Ethereum, they've forked, meaning that the nodes, these anonymous nodes that were running this computer program of open source software, decided that they wanted to change the version of the software that they're running, meaning that they changed the rules of the network that they were supporting, which created two different networks, like an amoeba, right? If you're settling billions of dollars of securities between these known trusted institutions, and all the ledger you're using forks into two,
you just brought in a different variable that we haven't discussed yet.
Yeah.
Okay. So we also
that's what debate's all about. Ian.
So, but okay,
Good work,
but
Dave.
we were at a 2-vector model, and now we're on a 3-vector model.
I got you.
So on the third vector, which Dave just brought up, was the concept of the fork. But we have a concept in the permissioned RWA space called security tokens. And security tokens mean that were that to happen, the underlying assets would not be lost. Okay? It is incredibly important to appreciate that because we use security token standards that allow us to burn and reissue. So we take all the advantage of when a transaction took place, and then should there ever be a fork, we would be able to burn and reissue and give you back those assets on a blockchain that we all agreed on without any loss to the user. You are right. If we didn't have, and look, Bitcoin came many, many years before the technology of security token standards. Bitcoin's 15 years old? No, more. A little bit more than 15 years old. Oh, 20 years, almost 20 years old now. Closer to 20 than 15. Anyway, years old. And security token standards that are hardened are 5, 6, 7 years old. So it's a relatively new technology, but old enough even for the OGs. And that is how we deal with that issue in this third factor, which is if we did see something like that happen in a public chain, we would be able to burn and reissue those assets.
And I guess I don't disagree that there's a way to deal with forks, but you've now basically said, okay, we actually don't really trust the ledger that we're transacting on.
No, that's not true. Look, I trust that my car is not going to drive into a telephone pole. Doesn't mean I don't wear a seatbelt.
Yeah.
The fact that I have a tool to protect me against the third vector doesn't mean that I believe that the base layer is insecure. It just means that in an abundance of caution, we have built in the fail safes for that third vector.
Mm-hmm. It sounds, look, the proponent of the permissionless would be like, it sounds like you have taken a piece of technology that was designed to do this one thing really well, which was operate in totally permissionless environments. And you've spent a lot of time and effort to make that work for something when you could have just said, you know what we really need is just a shared ledger, right? And we need some governance around who owns
You're right.
the shared ledger. And
Totally.
yeah.
And I agree.
A lot of time and effort into like taking something and adapting
Yeah, I
to
just
the purpose in which it wasn't really built for.
but I think that the best shared ledger technology that we have are these public permissionless blockchains. So you're right, that is super valuable to have a shared ledger. And if I could somehow come up with a shared ledger that had the brand value that was worth billions of dollars at the same cost of gas, I would do that. But the gas is fractions of a penny, and the brand value is billions that I get for my fractions of a penny gas. The value prop, look, you could argue that the gas fees for public blockchains are too low, right? We could talk about the fact that the economics here are really interesting. That what I'm really saying is I'm getting billions of dollars worth of brand value for transactions that are fractions of a penny. And so I'm just being an economic actor and taking advantage of a mispriced utility. Yeah, like if you're going to give me free electricity, I'm going to use the free electricity and not build my own power station. If the electricity price was more expensive, I would have to build my own power plant. So if you're going to give me really, quasi free electricity, I'm going to use it. Sure.
I think so. I want to shift a little bit this debate away from sort of the philosophy of the architecture to the implications for the architectural decisions. And that's very fluffy. Let me make that a lot more real.
Well, Dave, while you're doing that, I think another really good, interesting thing to pull in for the listeners is use very specific use cases that you're seeing out there. Like how is Wisdom Tree making their decisions? How is BlackRock making their decisions? And let's make it like realistic to what's really happening right now.
I think the permission proponents, really what they're saying is that like the regulatory requirements that we have mean that we can't work in the permissionless world. Like we have laws that define like how securities can move between participants, and that involves a transfer agent, and the transfer agent, in order to transfer a security, needs to know who the sending and recipient party is, right? So they're just saying like the fundamental like legal basis for our business like requires an identity, and regardless of what you think.
Can I just refine that a little bit, Dave? Yeah. I would say it like this. We're okay with a really permissionless internet. I mean, there are very few things on the internet that are permissioned. I mean, really, we've done a phenomenal job of protecting freedom of thought out of the United States vis-a-vis the internet. What we've really said is financial assets should, because they ride on these economic rails and can be used by bad actors to, not for ideas and for debate, but to actually fund bad stuff, those have to have different rules. So we're more okay with the free movement of ideas than we are with the free movement of economic power.
Yeah.
And so the institutions, and so I would argue, even if it wasn't mandated by the government, large financial institutions that have stakeholders that are pensions and states, and even if there weren't words on a page regulations on this subject, I do think there'd be some self-regulation on this subject.
Yeah, I agree. And let's pull it up to the app layer, because we talked a lot about permissionless on the like trustlessness and permission versus permission at the sort of ledger level. An argument could be made, like, if I was like a utilitarian philosopher, right? Greatest good for the greatest amount of people. That's the decision that I made. An argument could be made that the whole KYC AML regime, while it does in some instances prevent bad actors, really inconveniences them more than prevents them. They always find a way from using the financial system for wrong purposes. That the harm that this regime has imposed in terms of like shutting out good actors, like just normal people, and making it, and the cost of upholding that like the actual cost of, because the AML system is empirically ineffective. I think statistics say it catches between 0.01 to 1% of illicit funds, right?
There's
There's hundreds of billions of dollars a year that are spent on this. And what you get for that is actually, one, you don't stop the bad actors, and two, you have a world where you have, over a billion people without a bank account. You have huge swaths of modern society which don't have access to like financial markets and the financial system. Yep. And like that is really bad for a lot of reasons. And like this permissionless model basically says, yes, it does mean that in some instances we make it easier for bad actors, but the benefits we get from that permissionless model outweigh the negative sort of implications of that. And so that, like at the app layer, that's what a permissionless proponent would say.
So I agree. I think there's degrees to this. For instance, I think the accreditation system in the U.S., which is a form of permission or permissionlessness, is terrible. I think it's terrible. It's a uniquely American thing. It's completely regressive, and it's inherently un-American. I just think that there's that is, I don't think any of us should feel comfortable with the accreditation system in the United States as it's set up for investors. But we do need a way to sort who we want to transact with. And communities have done that historically on economic grounds forever. I will say, I agree with you that we may be, that which we can count may be doing more harm than good. But if we removed this community construction, we don't know what we would have. I can't prove a negative. I can't tell you if there were no guardrails, what would it mean for the movement of financial assets and funds, right? We can only say that today we've taken really smart people who are nefarious actors and they've figured out an end around because we have these rules. But we don't know how it would change the very nature of the community, this economic community, if we just had zero rules around transacting in this way. We'd see, how much more scams would we have? Clearly fraud would go up, right? Fraud wouldn't go down, right? So you don't know by how much it would go up. You don't know by how much more easily nefarious actors would be able to move money around. We don't know how much more easy the financial industry for terrorism would be. So if we removed all the rules, we don't know what the world would look like. Given the rules today, we see that bad actors can get around this stuff. But with total anarchy, we don't know what the financial landscape would look like, and it's impossible to prove a negative. So I would caution that philosophical point to the utilitarian philosopher. I will make an argument for permissionless, which is, and this is why I think you do see major institutions playing in the permissionless space, is it makes things extrajudicial. Inherently, it's extrajudicial. There is a huge economic incentive to having extrajudicial financial system, namely distribution. If you are trying to sell financial products around the world, then doing it permissionless, where you don't have to deal with the parochial jurisdictional requirements of every market with which you engage, clearly makes the spice flow. Clearly, if you don't have any boundaries or any government friction points, which is what permissionless is, your international distribution will be better. So one of the great incentives for permissionless for major institutions that are participating is they want international distribution. And from their perspective, if somebody in Antarctica, let's pick a country without a government, a place without a government. If somebody in Antarctica wants to buy permissionlessly and a US fund manager can sell permissionless there, and they're not breaking any US rules, and Antarctica doesn't have any rules around it, then obviously a US fund manager is an economic actor and they should sell permissionless to Antarctican buyers. Definitionally, and I would certainly think that that's okay. I mean, it's not for me to make maybe Antarctica is a super libertarian place, and that's amazing. I'm a libertarian myself, so that's great. But let's not bury the lead. The reason major institutions are in the permissionless game is when you get rid of jurisdictional friction, you increase international distribution. The reason why it's not a big deal for them to do permissionless in the US is they wouldn't be able to do it here anyway. So, there's not an incentive for them to be doing permissionless things that, for the most part, in the US, because they'd be governed by other rules in the US. The value of their participation in permissionless is so that they can participate in non-US jurisdictions that don't have the same frameworks that we do.
And I think we're going to see this play out because the SEC has just announced their sort of tokenized stock sandbox or exemption where people are now, they're going to say that you're allowed to tokenize stocks without the consent of the issuer and that those stocks can trade on DeFi applications. And so now, like, you know, that's going to be a big change, right? Usually, like, throughout all of time, like, the issuer of the security, so, you know, NVIDIA has a say in like where its stock trades and
where it lists,
yeah, or by definition who can trade it. And but now that the SEC's kind of said that's going to go away. The Genius Act doesn't put any requirement on KYCing stablecoin holders, right? It like the model that Circle runs today, this two-tier model where you have to KYC to be a Circle customer. To mint and redeem directly with them, so you can send them fiat and they'll give you USDC, and you can send them USDC and they'll give you fiat. But the vast majority of USDC trading today is, you know, outside of the bounds of that contractual arrangement, that KYC arrangement between Circle, and the vast majority of USDC that's trading today, Circle doesn't know who's trading it, right? And if you look at stablecoins, I think like that's a really good proxy for which model gets network effects and which model works.
I think that's let's stay on that for a minute. I think that's actually a great model. I think that's the right compromise, which is, look, if you want to be able to have access to the system, you're going to go through KYC, but we can accept that there are actors who have financial assets that don't have access to the system. We've accepted that when it comes to cash. We've accepted the fact that drug dealers can deal in cash, but if they want to go put the money into a bank, they're going to get KYC'd. Like, that's a model that exists in the world. You can deal in gold, but when you want to sell the gold and keep that money in a bank, you have to go through KYC. What you see here from the stablecoin model is really a replica of what we do in the traditional financial system. And I think it's the right compromise. You wouldn't want all of, to your point on what's the right trade-off, you wouldn't want all the friction of everybody who's dealing in cash to need to register who they are every time they take a cash payment. That's obviously, you know, does more harm than good to economic growth and progressive ideas of economic success and technological investment. But you do want people that have direct access to the systems, that they can be real aggregators of financial power to reveal themselves and make sure that they're good actors.
There's one. So first of all, I mean, it's a tough debate because we both agree with the hybrid model, right? And we're trying to sort of play the purists on both ends. But exactly. I would be remiss if I didn't add, I mean, I'm making an argument for the permission side now, which is that yes, cash and gold and bearer bonds, which have been, you know, largely phased out, do like trade permissionlessly between peers. Like you and I'm in a parking lot in Cornelius, North Carolina right now on my way to a holiday. You could meet in this parking lot and you could hand me a suitcase for $1 million and no one's gonna know. Unless there's
that's how you used to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, yeah, no comment. But because that permissionless system is really confined to like the physical world, those physical limitations restrict the scope and scale and throughput of that permissionless like transaction network. Like if I want to give you $1 billion and the only way to do that permissionlessly with cash, that is a way different proposition than me giving you $1 billion in USDT, because I can give you $1 trillion in USDT on a flash drive. But if I have $1 billion in cash, I need a freaking shipping container. Like it is going to be like a serious.
But that's a good gating mechanism.
Yeah.
And that gets to, if you really want to have the trust and security of a U.S. bank and the convenience of it, both of which are required to amass real economic power, then you've got to play by those social rules.
But you don't now. That's the point. It's like I can transfer you $1 billion of USDT and no one will know, right? Like,
yeah, but if
you go to turn it into US dollars in a bank, they're gonna know. They're gonna know who you are.
But
on the radar.
But with the way the world is moving now, with a lot of these stablecoin native neobanks that are popping up, eventually you might be able to figure out a way to get this into some sort of banking system. We're not talking about like the global banking system.
Let's stay with this idea for a minute. What do I mean by aggregating real economic power in society? Okay. Yes, you can move $1 billion around on a flash drive in USDC and not redeem it. Okay. But if you want to start hiring employees to work for your organization, if you want to start buying land, if you want to start doing the things that take it from from paper wealth to real economic power, that's hard to do without winding back up into the traditional system.
It's hard.
So yes,
it's getting easier.
It's getting easier.
Look, it's getting easier, but as we sit here today, there's a big difference between $1 billion sitting on a flash drive. Take Satoshi's billions of dollars sitting on a flash drive in Bitcoin. That is a ledger entry, but that Satoshi's billions sitting in Bitcoin, that's not real economic power. If you took that same amount of money and decided you would, build a fentanyl laboratory or build a terrorist organization or build, and you needed to do those things to be an economic actor, to be a social actor, to really move society and have an influence, it would be very difficult to do that you could, in theory, just pay people in Bitcoin. We get it. The Iranians are supposedly taking Bitcoin as payment to move through the Strait of Hormuz. I got it. But the exception proves the rule. We're at scale to do this in a meaningful way, to buy land and labor and power and energy is a huge part of where the world's going from an AI perspective. And to buy compute, and you think about the challenges of the future, I think, it's still the case that at least it provides some social handbrakes in this contract.
I agree, and I think that that's why, to date, they've been okay with this. Like, they basically, like, by they, I mean, like, the regulators, like, this permissionless world with these, like, permissionless ports of call, where it's like, all right, if you're going to do any exchange activity, you're going to interact with the normal banking system, anyone you deal with needs to be KYC'd. And we're not going to worry about what's happening out there on the secondary markets, because to do anything, you really need to come through one of those ports and turn it into dollars, and then, you buy bomb making materials, or, pay your terrorist employees or whatever it is. But there's definitely a world where that changes. Like, there are companies that allow you to run payroll in stable coins. You can buy real estate in Bitcoin. Like, that's been happening for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, we're moving to a more decentralized world. So, we're going to have solutions for it. I would say the other thing that we haven't covered is there's an aspect of what the banking system does, which we've covered before, but it's worth highlighting now, which is it creates credit. And so it's the deposits in the banking system today that create credit. And so if you have flighty money, illicit money that make up the deposit base of a bank, and those monies get seized, and the bank has written credit against those deposits, the bank is going to have a solvency problem. Right? If I've got a bank that's got 20 billion in deposits and it's written 100 billion in credit, and I put 5 billion in more deposits in it, and now I've got another 25 billion in credit that could be extended, and those 5 billion get seized, my loan to value ratio at the bank, that solvency of the bank is significantly impaired. So if the money,
I think that's happening today. Like, the cartels they don't have like 100 billion in cash. Like, the cartels own real businesses. They have, they are conglomerates now. Like,
the question would be, if we had no rules whatsoever, how much bigger would the cartel's economic might be? And do we want unidentified actors that solve their commercial disputes with murder as opposed to through the legal system.
I think
Look, why don't we want cartels as major economic actors?
We don't.
Let's get to
No.
The reason why is we want commercial disputes to be solved in the judiciary as opposed to by violence, right? That is at the core of why we don't want the cartel owner to own the laundromat, and we'd rather it be the non-cartel owner to own the laundromat. Okay, if we removed these barriers to the cartel doing as they wish in the banking system, then they would, I think, be significantly larger part of the economy, and by definition, society would run less on the judiciary.
I think they already are. I don't think they have any issue accessing the banking system today. I don't think that that's their like gating item. I think it's like the gating
I think they pay a tax. I think they pay a tax for whatever this friction point is. I don't think they have no issue. I think they're certainly able to do their thing.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a non-issue, but once again, I can't prove a negative. I can't tell you what society would look like and how powerful they would be if we removed it completely. Would it look like 1990 Russia if we removed this completely? I don't think that that's a great thing. Yeah.
No.
That's the issue. There are societies that didn't have these rules. They look pretty, they're a little bit rougher around the edges.
I know. And look, it's hard to continue the debate further because I do ultimately agree that like there needs to be like a balance between permissionless.
I think I'm the more libertarian of the two of us, so I think we've completely swapped sides, and we're both getting. I think we're both getting relatively uncomfortable right now. So,
listen, you guys.
I think we've given everybody a flavor, Samantha.
But
I think we've now.
I knew you guys.
I think we've somehow switched political parties in the context of this just now. I'm not really sure how that just happened.
Yeah.
Listen, I knew you guys couldn't follow exact instructions, but it was a great debate. Good job. I think we laid out both sides, regardless of whether you stayed on the side you were supposed to stay on or not. So let's go ahead and move on. Let's wrap up the episode. This was really good. I do think it would be useful for a future episode, so be thinking about this before next week or the next week. Now let's bring this to like real world use cases. Like what are people doing that's really taking off that really sits in permissionless and what really sits in permissioned? There are examples out there, plenty of examples out there. And so I think it'll be really interesting to talk about that. So, okay, let's go to the signal. So based on this topic, based on what we covered today, what are the things specifically that you're most interested in watching how it plays out?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think in terms of this permissionless debate, the stablecoin model that we have today is working really well, where we have sort of permissioned systems at the issuance and mint and redeem layer, and then the secondary markets are totally permissionless. As stablecoins like grow, and like let's say they go from 300 billion to 30 trillion, like do the regulators allow that to continue? Basically, like is that model, and then like on the other side, like the banks are going to try to create these like deposit coins that are completely wall gardens and only, they've already done this for the last 10 years. Like, these stable coins can only move between JP Morgan customers or B of A customers, and we need to know who all of them are, and they never get adoption. It's like, do they continue with that system, or do they relent and actually say, okay, you know what, our stable coins need to work like USDT and USDC. And so if they do, then this model is going to get really bigger than it already is, really fast. So I'm watching.
Yeah, I agree. I think the stablecoin model is great, and I think we've seen it actually a little bit borrowed from like the ETF framework, where certain banks can make ETFs, and so you call up the desk and say, I need X amount of ETF, and they put it together and they tell you the ETF as opposed to the bundle of stocks, and then you trade the ETF, and the create redeem function I think is actually to some extent borrowed from that framework. So I think it's great. It's worked really well. What I'm curious about is how much regulation we won't see in international markets, and so how much more permissionless will grow in those markets, and how much more U.S. institutions will take advantage of that global distribution through permissionless applications. I think that's a huge story, because U.S. financial services have tremendous brands. All the names you've mentioned, all the names we couldn't mention, they're globally recognized brands They're considered good fiduciaries and stewards of capital. They're considered that partially because of the rules-based economy we have here. So you get this really neat double win, which is you get all the brand halo effect for US asset managers, and then you get all the ease of distribution into third-party countries because they don't have the regulatory burdens, and the consumers there can take advantage of permissionless, relatively lower friction investment experiences.
Yeah, you guys basically covered mine, but I think in addition to what y'all just said, it's thinking about the global economy and thinking about a lot of these neo-banks, or let's say technology-enabled financial institutions that are popping up everywhere. I see a new pitch on them every single week. So Dave, you sell directly into them, so we know that there's just so many, and they're going to take off. They're going to start going after, and already are, capturing the unbanked and underbanked. And as stable coins grow, as Dave just mentioned, and then as the global economy wants more access to financial services, how is the US and the big regulatory bodies going to be thinking about a global world that's becoming more permissionless, especially powered by stable coins?
I think US institutions and US regulators would be smart to keep us as a place that's a little bit more sensitive to these ideas, because it actually creates more brand value for these asset managers. So in some sense, they can get the best of both worlds. They can get the international presumption of US regulatory oversight with the ease of distribution, taking advantage of the halo effect of US regulatory oversight. So I think they're kind of they're nudging themselves into the sweet spot.
Yeah, it's a line to walk for sure. So we'll see how they keep walking it.
Cool.
Great.
All right, good job,
Nice
guys.
chatting, guys. Be good.
Talk soon. Happy Memorial Day weekend.
Happy Memorial Day week.